the Nebraska Cornhuskers, 3-5 last season. I mentioned it before the break. This is year 4 for Scott Frost, and we have not had a winning season. This is year 4 for Adrian Martinez. And after people put him top 10 on the Heisman odds board going into his sophomore year, boy, we haven't really even seen it. And last year, when they started doing that whole, we're going to run Adrian Martinez and Luke McCaffrey kind of game going, well, Luke McCaffrey's gone. And it is this Nebraska offense. That's how I was trying to break it down. And they get a lot of yards. They're just not very efficient. They're not really good at punching it in. They're not really good at turning it into points. Scott Frost lit it up at UCF. He was from the offensive staff at Oregon. You know, we've looked at, again, Adrian Martinez as somebody that could be a real difference maker. Wan'Dale Robinson's gone. Man, we didn't get JD Spielman. I mean, this Cornhuskers team, I look at them this spring and I am looking for hope. And honestly, I wrote a little spring questions piece for CBSSports.com, and I gave a whole item. I was like, yo, can I get a vibe check? Can I see how are Nebraska fans feeling? This is the passionate fan base that sells out the stadium when you can have full fans in the stadium, but sells out the stadium no matter what's going on. Man, yeah, I don't see a lot of hope. I'm looking for things to hold on to right now for Nebraska football, because it seems to be a team that is floundering in not even thoroughly the middle, but the lower middle of the Big Ten.
I see signs for hope. The problem is there are still very dark clouds hovering above them, because if you watch this team last year, one of the problems I felt that they had in the first few years of the Frost area, defensively, they were getting killed up front. They could not stop the run. Teams were running all over them. Last year, they made significant improvement against the run. They did a much better job, and I feel like they were heading in the right direction. They've got a lot of players coming back from that defense this year. I think that the next step is to get a better pass rush and create a little more chaos, because they weren't very disruptive. They were able to limit you as far as keeping in big plays. I think from what I saw against the run, they did a much better job of that, but they still have work to do. The offensive line, I didn't think was that bad last year. I thought a lot of the problems that they had on offense were the quarterback position. I don't know that the quarterback position has improved at all going into 2021. I don't think the offense improves by losing Wan'Dale Robinson. So it's for every step forward I see, there's a couple step backs and a couple other areas of concern. And then just, if we don't even look at the roster, and this is more of a season preview than a spring thing, but just if you look at their 2021 schedule, they've got a non-conference game at Oklahoma. Their draw from the East is at Michigan State, Michigan, and Ohio State. They get Wisconsin on the road. They get Minnesota on the road. I look at this situation for Nebraska where I think that this team is going to be better this year, but I just think there's too many flaws, and that schedule is somewhat of a monster. And I'm just man, they might be better and still be 5-7, and everybody might still want Scott Frost fired.
I could see that. I think there's some reasons for optimism here, but there's also quite a few reasons for pessimism. It's important that we exercise patience with coaches hired in the early signing period era, because we are seeing continuously here that the vast majority of these recruiting classes, whether it's Dan Mullins, who's doing a really good job at Florida, or Willie Taggart, who's already fired at Florida State, these first recruiting classes they signed suck. Their attrition rates are over 50% almost across the board. A lot of these guys are no longer there. So, that class of 2018 that they signed, that you'd expect to be your seniors. And really, because of how the early signing period worked out, it really affected the 2019 class as well, because so many teams were working ahead, and these new staffs in the early period were behind the 8 ball. Their 2019 classes aren't really turning out to be much. Nebraska took a lot of chances on kids from Florida and the Southeast that other schools in the Southeast had real questions about, either character-wise or academically, right? And if it worked out, great. But if it didn't, and a lot of those dudes lasted a semester, 2 semesters, 3 semesters, and they bounced. So I think their level of talent on this team athletically does not reflect what they signed on signing day, because a lot of those guys who were the better athletes in those classes are no longer there. Or hell, sometimes they didn't qualify at all. So I think you have that issue to deal with. Wandale is a huge problem. I mean, he was their best offensive player by a mile. He actually had more catches than all of their other starters combined and as many targets as their top three other guys combined. Now, they bring in some good transfers. I think Samari Toure from Montana is somebody who's a pretty proven receiver. Oliver Martin from Iowa, we'll see. They just couldn't hit explosive plays last year at all, man. They were 123rd in passing explosiveness. That's pretty bad. But defensively, I feel like I think they could take a step forward defensively. Like we, talk about Scott Frost and why his offenses aren't killing it, but defensively, I think there's some stuff here. Like I think their linebackers will be better. They had a pretty decent defensive line last year at times, and it should have more depth this year. Last year, they got a little bit lucky with staying super healthy. I think they'll have better depth there this year. I think they could take a step forward, be pretty good along both lines of scrimmage, and they could have a winning record. Yeah, I don't think it's that crazy.
Defense has been steadily improving. 5.96 yards per play in 2019 versus the Big Ten. Cut that down to 5.46 in 20. 9 starters back, as you mentioned. I have concerns about Adrian Martinez, clearly, but like it's more of a like you remember the Chris Ricks era at Florida State, where he was a 4-year starter and just never really saw improvement and kind of just held the program where it was, kind of held it down. I feel like that's what's happening here. You can't pin it all on one position, but it is the most important position of the game. And I actually remember the game. What game was it where the McCaffrey came in and like looked like a little bit of a spark? But then when Adrian Martinez decides to come back, Luke McCaffrey decides to bounce. And then you're like, all right, well, what other options are there? And it kind of looks like it's going to be another year of Adrian Martinez. Like, I just think it's going to be more the same for Scott Frost. And then it was interesting. Was it Tom? It was you that said everyone wants Scott Frost fired again. I think there's very much a split fraction in Lincoln, because you've got the tried and true Big Red, we go every week, we support him, our guys, he's one of our guys, and probably they're in the crew that probably were really faithful and said, let's even give him an extension, which still kind of boggles my mind why that happened. But then there's probably another vocal faction. It's a weird spot, and they're living in the 90s and thinking we can recapture some of that magic. You talk about tough places to recruit. Like, it's actually pretty impressive. You could go down to Florida and get some players to go to Lincoln from there. But I don't know. I remember talking to some Big Ten fans and saying, hey, when was a realistic expectation of when Nebraska could compete for, back in the glory days? Well, let's just say Big Ten championships. And I said, well, obviously, I think Ohio State owns the conference. I don't know if that's going to happen anytime soon, if at all, unless Ohio State had a massive setback. But the good news is that the Big Ten West, we've seen other teams cycle through. We've seen Minnesota get close. We've seen Northwestern, win it a couple times. We've seen Iowa win it. Like, it's kind of wide open in the West. So you guys, within 3 years, I think you should be getting closer. Well, the time has come, and we haven't even seen them scratch, get anywhere near close enough. So I'm starting to get a little bit more worried about Scott Frost and Nebraska and what direction they go. Like, they have to see improvement. They have to. And
is firing Scott Frost an admission of programs like reset limitations and expectations? Like, if Scott Frost doesn't work out there, is it Nebraska making an admission about what they can be?
Maybe. I mean, I think that you'd have to look at it. I think it's definitely one of those look in the mirror moments, if that's what it comes to. But like you mentioned, Danny, like the fan base, and it's weird. This is anecdotal because I got a notification today that today was like my 12th year anniversary on Twitter, which is terrifying to think of. But I just think of when Nebraska first joined the Big Ten and like interacting with the Nebraska fans over the years. I've been on Twitter and on social media, and the complete sea change in their attitudes then to where they are now. Like it is just like gradually, like, you know, when you're in a hospital room and there's like a chart that says, you know, your level of pain 1 to 10, and it's got like the smiley face for 0, and it gradually gets worse as you get closer to 10. That has been my interactions with Nebraska fans on social media over the last 10 years. It's just every single year, it's gradually getting worse and worse and worse. And they're approaching like that 10. Like they used to be some of the happiest, like most optimistic fans I'd ever dealt with. And now they're just kind of like jaded beyond belief.
So this, like, single results, I think in college football do matter, like for fans, you know, like being able to just have one really good win. That is something that like fans can hang on to. It doesn't always like change your program, but in the last 3 years, since the East-West split, 3 teams have won the Big Ten West. It's Wisconsin, it's Northwestern, it's Iowa. Those 3 teams have Big Ten West titles. 3 other teams in the Scott Frost era have top 10 wins. That would be Minnesota, Purdue, and Illinois. Nebraska in the Scott Frost era does not have a top 10 win, does not have a Big Ten West title. Like even like Illinois, Purdue, Minnesota, like, no, you're not up there in that top tier, but you at least get that one game a year that's like, ooh, we can play with anybody. What's Nebraska's best win?
I don't know.
Like I remember they almost beat Ohio State.
Yeah, they had a close game with Ohio State. I think that's the biggest win of the Scott Frost era. And
that was in year 1. It was almost beating Ohio State. I mean, I think Scott Frost, in terms of the fan base, in terms of the sort of like anecdotal feeling vibes, like just get one really good win. I think that it would at least be a big thing to change sort of the way the conversation goes.